House Bill 4143, relating to housing and declaring an emergency.
Question now rises upon third reading and final passage of House Bill 4143B. Co-carrier, Representative Keny-Guyer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, I am honored to carry House Bill 4143 along with Chief Sponsor, Representative Gorsuch. Since the close of the 2015 session, it's become increasingly clear that we're in a statewide affordable housing crisis. Eugene and Portland declared housing emergencies in October. The vast majority of questions at my town halls and constituent coffees over the last 6 months have been on the lack of affordable housing. More importantly, as chair of the Human Services and Housing Committee, I have heard from communities all across Oregon with similar concerns through our hearings in November, January, this month, and through email. The situation has become dire for Oregonians, many of whom work full-time and still can't keep up with the skyrocketing housing costs. We've seen an increase in the number of kids missing school because of asthma. With rising rent, parents often cut the heat, which in combination with our damp climate often leads to mold and asthma. Parents are afraid to complain for fear landlords will retaliate with a rent increase or a no-cause rental termination. Many families are pushed out of their homes and into increasingly unstable living situations. Often the only remotely affordable housing they can find is far away, so parents have to commute further to jobs and children commute further to work, or they have to leave school mid-year. This leads to lowered academic success, increased congestion, and destabilized families and communities. At best, families who are fortunate to remain in their homes still live with the stress that they are 30 days away from a rent increase they may not be able to afford, or 30 or 60 days away from a no-cause rent termination. At worst, families are forced to crash in friends' homes or live out of their cars or on the street, sometimes in the tent cities that we see cropping up all over. The situation is so dire that we've already run out of funding for the emergency housing assistance and for the state homeless assistance program, because the crisis is far worse than we anticipated when we set those funding levels last year. Our housing crunch is a result of many factors, including, but not limited to, the declining investment by the federal government in affordable housing over the last several decades, stagnating wages that haven't kept up with home prices during that time, the recession that began in 2008 that slowed down construction dramatically, the foreclosure crisis that happened around that same time, where homeowners lost homes and got thrown back into the rental market, speculation in buying up many of those homes, as well as in building new luxury apartments, the emerging shared economy, such as Airbnb and VRBO, which converted some of the long-term rentals into short-term rentals, zoning policies and permitting practices, the popularity of Oregon in many of our regions, which have seen a dramatic increase in population. There are several bills this session that address some of those issues, and we know we need to move more boldly and more comprehensively in the next session to build our way thoughtfully out of this crisis, figuratively and literally. While it will take years before supply catches up with demand, we need to address the immediate needs of tenants who now comprise 40% of the state. That is well over 1 million people. After months of consideration, this bill contains 2 very modest provisions that will help tenants. First, a ban on rent increase in the first year of a month-to-month rental, and then after that, a 90-day notification for any rent increase on month-to-months. It also contains 2 other provisions agreed to by the Landlord-Tenant Coalition. One is a technical fix to a law we just passed in 2015 regarding secondary emergency exits from bedrooms to ensure that the building code in question is the one that was in effect at the time of construction or remodel. The second is an increase in fee for smoking violations by tenants when there is a no smoking policy in their lease agreement. That fee after the first warning would go up from $50 to $250. I know this bill falls far short of what we need to do to provide more stability to renters in a hot rental market, where rents have soared at historic levels with no end in sight. Due to the compressed time frame of the short session, we were not able to agree on solutions concerning no-cause rent terminations, retaliation, and the high burden of relocation costs. I am eager to continue working over the interim to find solutions to the issues we were not able to address in the short session. In the meantime, I encourage you to support the very modest steps of House Bill 4143B to bring temporary relief. Struggling Oregon families can't wait. Thank you, colleagues.
Representative Keny-Guyer, would you like to close?
I would. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, colleagues, for the vigorous debate. I just want to say that I don't like to sleep at night. I have all kinds of ideas of the things that we should be doing to move Oregon ahead in terms of this housing crisis. And starting back when as soon as the session ended and this really burgeoned into a crisis, I've been talking about this kind of nonstop. And there have been so many people who have been really engaged in this discussion. First of all, the Landlord-Tenant Coalition and tenants, advocates, housing advocates who have been in coalitions and been working on these issues for so many years. I really applaud them for seeing this crisis way before I certainly did and that many of us did. But really in the last few months, we know how pervasive it's become. And we put a lot of different ideas on the table. We know that this crisis is not going to be solved overnight. There are other bills right now that are trying to deal with home ownership that we passed out of our committee, that are trying to deal with land use innovation or annexation or inclusionary zoning. There are a number of different bills that we're looking at. The LIFT program, which puts general obligation bonds to work to create new affordable housing, construction of new affordable housing for low-income families. We have requests in the budget for $10 million for emergency housing assistance, as well as the state homeless assistance program, EHA and SHAP. We are trying to get funding in the budget to preserve affordable housing. This one little bill is absolutely not going to solve the crisis at all. It aims to increase stability and predictability for tenants in a really hot market when we know supply and demand is totally out of whack. We need to act comprehensively and boldly, as I said before, as much as we can in a short session, but then in the long run, to really solve a lot of these issues, we are not going to do it overnight. This bill, which aims to increase stability, is a small step in the right direction. It does not say what the rent should be. It says just give people more time. There are many really fabulous landlords out there. There are many of my friends who I've talked to for hours and hours and hours, some of whom are tenants, some of whom are landlords, about this issue. I know many of you have too. There are many fabulous landlords who think these are very, very reasonable steps. Even when we had our first session on February 1st, our first hearing that was 4.5 hours, I asked outright, landlords, do you have a lot of landlords, the landlord associations, do you have a lot of landlords that would increase it in the first year? Many states have more of a tradition of one-year leases as opposed to Oregon that tends to have more of a month-to-month tradition. But almost everyone I talked to said no, that would be bait and switch. If somebody is looking at their pay stub and they're looking at Craigslist, they see how much they can afford, and then 3 months later, the rent goes up. That's the kind of thing we're trying to protect against. So, colleagues, this is a very simple consumer protection measure that we can do, balanced with some things that the landlords have wanted in a long tradition of the Landlord-Tenant Coalition that has worked together for many years. It is, I believe, very balanced. I want to particularly appreciate all those tenants and advocates who have worked on these issues for years. The Speaker and her staff, Andy Short, who've done enormous amount of work, especially over the last few months, but over the last few years as well. The chief sponsor, Representative Gorsuch. The 15 representatives and senators who attended the Housing Emergency Forum that Representative Noss and I held together. Those who spoke on the floor. And the support from both sides of the aisle who have voted in past committees and hopefully who will vote here on the floor today. It's really incumbent upon us in every session to deal with the emerging important issues, as we did in 2012 in the foreclosure crisis when we assisted homeowners. That is part of the American dream. We want to get people back there. Our low vacancy rates and high rents and instability for tenants undermine the significant investments that we've made in education, in healthcare, in human services, in our transportation infrastructure. It is really threatening our very way of life in Oregon. This is a very small step that we can take to help find solutions. I urge and I vote.
Thank you, Representative.